And welcome back to Scarred for Life, the podcast where we open up old wounds by looking back at the films that scared us as kids. I'm Terry.
And I'm Mary Beth.
And each episode, our special guest brings with them a movie that traumatized them as a child.
This week, our guest is Noah Segan. As an actor, you've seen him in a ton of movies like Knives Out, Scare Package, Star Wars, The Last Jedi, Starry Eyes, and this year's Glass Onion, A Knives Out Mystery. But in front and behind the camera, his feature film debut, Blood Relatives, is currently streaming on Shudder. Welcome to the show, Noah.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here.
We're so excited to have you here. And I can't wait to dig into the movie you brought with you today, because what a choice. But before we do get that far, take us back to the very beginning. How did you get introduced to horror?
Wow. Well, I was the third of three kids, and both my siblings are quite a bit older than me. My sister is 7 years older than me. My brother's 10 years older than me. And by the time I came around, I think they were pretty liberal with me doing whatever I wanted to do. It's sort of, often it's the case with the baby, especially after you're tired of raising two other ones who are, doing their own thing. So, and it was also the sort of heyday, I guess, of video store culture.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. And so going down to the video store and kind of coming back with a handful of videos was super normal and encouraged, and they let me run amok. And the thing that I think really initially drew me to genre were franchises.
Okay.
Was this idea that you could I could rent 5 movies that are, a continuing story. So the serialization aspect really, really, really touched me. And it was also during a time when more of these movies were coming out, right? There was always another Nightmare. There was always another Friday movie. I mean, these were sort of big cultural moments. And so it was easy as a little kid to get excited about them, even if I kind of should not have been watching them.
I get that 100%. Which so you brought up the franchises. Do you have a favorite of all of them?
I mean, nowadays, in terms of sort of like a classic traditional, popcorny kind of franchise, I mean, I really like the Omen series.
Okay.
Oh, no one has said that before, Terry. I love that.
No, that's amazing.
I really, really like the Omen series, and I like what it sort of spawned. I like the kind of place that it has culturally.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just what I've always responded to in terms of, I think, just sort of kind of overall tone and story. I think the older I get, the more I kind of look at Jason as a representative of something rather than as Jason. For many years, it's like, you look at these monsters and you sort of see them for their monsterness. But then as you get older, I feel like I've sort of started looking at them more of sort of in the macro sense.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. What was the first franchise you watched as a kid?
It was probably Nightmare.
Okay, cool.
It was probably Nightmare. That was probably the first. And I mean, I guess that it was, it would have been 1 through 5. It would have been New Nightmare was,
that would have come out in what was that, 1990? I think 1991.
Yes. So it would have been through New Nightmare.
Okay.
It probably would have
94.
been the excitement of New Nightmare coming out that forced the Nightmare franchise upon me.
Did horror movies really scare you as a kid? Were you kind of a scared kid growing up, or were you okay with them for the most part?
Horror movies didn't scare me.
Okay.
But other movies did. A movie that is not the movie we're talking about today that really scared me was Edward Scissorhands.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay.
And it still scares me.
Really?
Yeah.
What about it?
What about it? Oh.
Yeah.
Jinx.
What about it scared you? Because we covered that one on the podcast before, so I cannot completely understand why. But I'm curious what resonated with you with that one.
I think it was the sort of the slow motion car crash effect that the movie had, where you sort of knew that this monster who was created for companionship, created for love and affection and fellowship, was not going to get that. And you were basically going to have to watch him suffer.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And that really affected me. And the idea that, people who may look or even act as if they care about you don't care about you.
Yep.
Or that your existence is tenuous, is based on I'm getting like deep here, is sort of based on the whims of these kind of shitty people.
Yep.
Like that hit me really hard when I was like 8 years old. Like to me, that was like that was something I didn't want to know.
Yeah. Wow.
That's a big reality, like realization as an 8-year-old, especially. Like that's a lot to grapple with at such a young age and like think about.
Yeah. And then you like makes you all fucking punk rock. I mean, shit.
Hell yeah. And then you're like, I'm cooler than all the other fucking 8-year-olds. But what were some of your other kind of favorite horror movies besides the franchises growing up?
Ooh, well, let's see. Growing up, I was a big Hitchcock guy.
Okay.
Like I loved old movies. So I loved Hitchcock. I loved the Hammer films. There was a period of time in the 90s where like basic cable television had just like a real wild potpourri of stuff. So you would see, old Universal monster movies, you would see Hammer stuff would get replayed. So, all the like Chris Lee stuff was big with me. And Hitchcock old movies, we had like VHSs of Hitchcock,
cool.
But then there were, it was wild when I think about the stuff that really freaked me out, like Beyond Edward Scissorhands, another one that really fucked me up and still sort of does. Not as much as Scissorhands, but Baron Munchausen.
Okay.
Scared the shit out of me.
I've actually never seen that
I've never seen that.
I've never seen it.
Oh man, it's incredible. It's incredible filmmaking. It's incredibly well done. It's a great cast. It's a great story. Much like Edward Scissorhands, it works because it's a great movie. It's very effective, but it is also about war, and it's about like a kid caught in the middle of a war. And, it's very much about what scares this kid, which is heavy. You know what I mean? Like watching a kid get scared.
Yeah.
If you are a kid, can fuck you up. But that's not really a horror. That's not really a horror movie. I mean, the horror movies were kind of safe spaces for me. The horror movies felt like they were fun. Child's Play was fun.
Yeah.
And then as I got a little bit older, even like Romero's films and stuff like that, there was a certain joy and a self-awareness that I really liked.
Cool. I think we've seen that a lot too, like in talking to so many people. Like horror is a comfort and you kind of know what to expect with a horror movie and to be scared. But then again, these other movies, these movies that are kids movies or movies that aren't seen as genre are the ones that kind of hit you out of nowhere because you don't expect to have those emotional reactions. Or like you said, you're confronting emotions that you hadn't really had to confront before as a kid. And it is really interesting about how that affects us as kids and as adults too. It is really
there weren't, the movies that scared me, are a lot of the movies that scare, and in sort of a good way as well. I'm sort of talking about a couple movies that I think really, like affected me and probably affect, the way that I think about storytelling and I have an emotional reaction. But then there were all the movies that we saw when we were kids and we were probably a little too young to see them, whether they were, whether it was Temple of Doom or Ghostbusters or Gremlins, there were movies that were sort of made for adults in the style of kids movies. So kids saw them.
Yep.
Yeah.
And then I think a lot of us saw them and it made us kind of feel like we were being included. We were like, oh, we're sitting at the grown-up table, and that shit was hugely influential. It was hugely influential to sort of feel like, I wasn't being talked down to.
Yeah, for sure. And so transitioning into your work now, Blood Relatives, can you tell our listeners a little bit about Blood Relatives if they aren't familiar?
Well, Blood Relatives is a father-daughter vampire road trip movie.
Hell yeah.
That that we made last year, and it just came out on Shudder.
Before we jump in super quick, I just want to say I just saw Bones and All and this. I say Bones and All and your movie are an incredible double feature. And I was telling Terry about this earlier.
Thank you. I mean, I'll take that as a compliment because Bones and All is
yes.
like a total masterpiece. But I will say on or off the record that that when I saw Bones and All at Fantastic Fest, I was like blown away because obviously I'm a huge fan of Luca's and it's a beautiful film. But I was like, oh man, like mechanically, there's something sort of similar here that I think that we're approaching probably for the same reasons, right? You know, and obviously, I think it's a little bit different. You know, there's different perspective, but like I said, I think that there's some mechanics that we're sort of approaching similarly, and then tonally they could not be more different. And I'm holy cow, like to even be mentioned in the same breath as that movie is like, I feel like that's like, I've won an award. Like I should, like, I'm like I like when they win all the Academy Awards and I'm gonna run up there and be like, guys, thank you, guys.
It's so your award too.
So happy to be part of the conversation.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, Terry. I was thinking about that all day after watching Blood Relatives and being like, these movies are so different but so similar, and I love it.
I'm so excited to hear that because like I watched your movie last night and then I'm watching Bones and All tonight, so I'm like that perfect timing for that too.
I can't wait to hear what you think. Like I said, I don't think it's I don't think that there are like, I mean, there's definitely like some plot and pacing and sort of mechanical similarities in terms of how those movies were, you know, sort of how they're kind of formed or molded. But, you know, I just think, I think that movie's so beautiful and it's so effective, and Taylor's performance is like bonk. I mean, you know, I think all the performances are good. I just think hers is so, it's like, I mean, you know,
Let's go back to your movie though. Sorry. I totally
I don't even know what to say. It's a different, I mean, I'm sorry. I'll keep talking about Taylor's performance in Bones and All.
But you're speaking about her performance in Bones and All, but I have to say Victoria Morales. Her performance in this is so fantastic. I remember seeing her in I think she was in Teen Wolf. A few seasons of Teen Wolf, and so that was my point of entry for her as an actress.
Have you seen Plan B?
Oh my god, I did. Yes.
Yeah.
I did.
Yeah.
She's phenomenal in this.
She is everything. She is the coolest, funniest, most like, I mean, knowing, like just like a person who you can like be like, can you take over here? And she'll be like, sure, I'll figure this out. I'll help make decisions. I have everyone's interest in mind. I mean, just like I cannot wait to see the movies she writes and directs.
Oh yeah. She brings such an energy to the performance. And I'm curious kind of where did this idea come from for you as to be your debut feature film? How did this come to be?
Well, I became a dad.
Okay.
I didn't have her, but my wife had a baby that I contributed to and continue to contribute to in as many ways as I can. And you know, I just wanted to. I didn't want to be on the road for 9 months out of the year, which is sort of the life of a character actor.
Yeah.
And so I stayed home and you know, even after my wife went back to work, she's a television writer and producer, and luckily she can work in LA and keep pretty regular hours. And I just decided, you know, I'll stay home. I'll be, you know, Mr. Mom for a little bit. And I would write while she napped, and I would write in the middle of the night while I would be rocking her. And, you know, I just sort of felt like there were a lot of changes happening and I should talk about them.
Yeah. That's so cool.
How old's your daughter now?
She's 5. And we have a little brother for her, who's 2.5.
Wow. That's so
cool. And so this is a question I asked you last time. I'm sorry, but with the vampire, and when we talked, you talked about like, you know, late nights, staying up all night with your daughter. And that reminds me of vampires in a tangential way of like being up all night as a vampire. I think that's an interesting intersection that maybe is like I'm reading too much into. It's probably pretty common that I read too much into these things. But what about the vampire really like attracted you to kind of have that be the monster of focus in Blood Relatives?
Yeah, I think sort of the sort of dual nature of the vampire started vibing with me. There's like this, there's this cool guy vampire that I sort of, I try to show in the movie a little bit that we've seen in like Near Dark, and we've seen in every other vampire movie where there's like some cool guy and he wears sunglasses at night and he, has a leather jacket. And his hair's not like this. His hair's like nice, or whatever. Like slick back hair guy, whatever. And I was like, that's kind of who I thought I was. Like, that was something that, I stayed up all night at film festivals and drank with my friends and, and then I was up all night with a baby.
Yeah.
And I kind of had this dual existence in the middle of the night. And it made me think of vampires and it made me think of my own mortality. It made me think of sort of this idea, this like, heavy duty hope that it's like, you hope that they outlive you.
Yeah.
Like you start having these thoughts that are like these really like deep existential thoughts about your own mortality and the fragility of your mortality. And so when I was thinking about this story and I was thinking about monsters, that's that monster. There he is.
Yeah. Well, and there's that whole, this isn't a spoiler, I'm being very vague. There's an argument that you and Victoria have in the film about that kind of child outliving their parent. And that's really, and I was curious, I guess, where that came from a similar place then. I'm assuming like that kind of existential fear of outliving your child.
Yes. Yeah. The fear of outliving your child, I think fear or realization that you're doing your kid a disservice by you being the child. We've all seen that, right? We've all seen, some of us have felt that we're the parent and our mom or dad is the child, and sort of that dynamic, and we've seen that dynamic in kitchen sink comedies. You don't need to make a horror movie about that. That's like something, that a lot of people have dealt with and talked about. And so, I kind of wanted to sort of investigate that through the lens of this sort of genre place, which is very comfortable for me.
Hell yeah.
So I have one question, and listeners, this is a little bit of a spoiler, so if you haven't seen the movie yet, skip ahead. But I am curious because you do open the world up a little bit as we start to get to the end in terms of introducing a character who shares my name. And I'm curious, is there a sequel potential here? Is there a different story that you might want to pursue with this? Because it seems like there's some nuggets here.
Well, I will say this without spoiling anything, that, I loved working with these people. I loved writing this script. I love these characters. I love this tone. It's something I'm very comfortable with. I think a lot of us who worked on the movie would love to continue to tell these stories. The guy who is our executive at Shudder, who is the executive producer of this movie, is this guy, Sam Zimmerman, who's really sort of a beloved guy among so many of us in the community. And he's a very close friend of mine. And I'm really happy to give out his home number and address.
Oh, cool.
And I think people should just reach out to him, just show up at any time, really, at his door, knock. Or just try the knob. You can just, if it's open, just go on in. He's fine with it. And just let him know that we should do more of these. Yeah, we should, maybe throw some pebbles at his window.
I can start cyberbullying him on Twitter if that needs to happen.
Let him know that we need to see more of these movies. Sure. Yeah.
All right.
Cool. All right, guys. Scarred for Life is launching a cyberbullying campaign into Sam Zimmerman to get more Blood Relatives movies brought up. I'm just kidding, everybody. I promise we are not bullies. Okay.
We need to take a quick break, listeners. We'll be right back. Okay. This is a new thing for us.
It's a new thing for us. But okay, so
congratulations. It's a sponsorship, yeah.
Thanks.
Advertisers, yeah.
So Noah, we have talked about your horror history and Blood Relatives, but what movie did you bring with you today for us to discuss?
Well, I brought a movie that scarred me for life,
Mm.
many of us. A movie that really still to this day kind of resonates with me when I think about my friendships and the bodies I've seen, the leeches I've found in my underpants, the
Pies you've
pies
consumed.
I've
Yes.
eaten. Thank you. Yes, I'm glad we're on the same page, ladies and gentlemen. Stand by me.
Stand by me. So I'm gonna give a brief synopsis. This is IMDb's wonky synopsis, everybody. So this is not me or Terry's doing. This is our copy and paste job from IMDb. After the death of one of his friends, a writer recounts a childhood journey with his friends to find the body of a missing boy.
It's just a little, I don't know, there's a little silly, a bit of a writing
A
there,
little
but
silly.
I gotta know that because boy, rewatching this movie as an adult, like just really brought me back to being a kid. But I am really curious. How old were you when you saw this movie? How did you see this movie? What about it terrified you? Give us your horror story.
Well, I think that this was I talked a little bit about this earlier. This was part of a generation of films that were shown so frequently on basic cable
Okay.
that you could turn your TV on like any given day or afternoon or weekend, and like Stand By Me would be playing. And I think that there were people who probably were programming it who were thinking like, well, it's a coming of age story about these
Mhm.
four nice looking boys, and and they sort of have this adventure, and why don't we just play it 5 times a day? And I think it was probably lost on a lot of people how much this would affect, you know, a 10-year-old kid who was watching this, who was wondering whether they were going to fit in with their friends or whether they were going to have friends just like the ones that they had over the summer. All these sort of like feelings that are incredibly universal, right?
Yeah.
You can't find anybody who has not had the summer with their best friends and seen them move away, or, not connect when school starts the next year, go to different schools, whatever the case may be. I mean, it was, this incredibly universal sort of vibe and feeling. And, along with that, just this sort of sense of loneliness, this sense of kind of, uh, of consequence, right? Like that's
Mhm.
such a huge thing, is when you start realizing that there are real consequences,
Yeah.
and you have to face them. And many of us, we go through our childhoods blissfully ignorant of being hurt physically or being hurt otherwise. I mean, and we're lucky for it, right? We're lucky if we get through our childhoods. Now we realize, now that we've, sort of hopefully branched out and opened our eyes, we see that there are so many kids who have totally fucked up childhoods. But
Yeah.
a lot of us go, oh no, we were fine. Especially kids who are like, people who are like millennials or like Gen X. Like we often like kind of are like, no, I've suppressed those memories. Everything was beautiful. But Stand By Me, through the eyes of these boomers, sort of like really does kind of force us to kind of face real, genuine fear with your peers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Boy, for me, like I remember seeing this movie when I was a kid and I was living in Alaska because I grew up in my first like elementary school years in Alaska, and I remember seeing this movie on VHS. And boy, it really kind of spoke to. I guess I didn't realize it at the time, but now looking back on it, particularly because it's been, gosh, I mean, I'm 41 right now. I saw it back in like the 80s, maybe the very early 90s is when I saw it. So like a long time ago. And as you said, millennials repressing a lot of shit. This movie brought back so many of those feelings of living in Alaska where people would come in and out of your life because most of the people that were friends were there because of the military. And so they'd be turning around and leaving. And I was a very shy, awkward, overweight, closeted queer kid that didn't understand his sexuality. And so there was like, watching this now as an adult, it just brought me immediately back and reopened a whole lot of like shit that I was like, oh God, bury that, because it just I don't know, this movie is something else.
It really is. And like it's funny because I had never thought about it as sad because my mom loves this movie. Like I
Yeah.
texted her that we watched it. She was like, it's my favorite movie. I love this movie so much. And like we watched it as a family a lot. And like when I was rewatching it, I only remembered like the pie scene. I
Mhm.
hadn't thought about that in forever. But then because I thought, okay, so for some reason I thought that was from a Tim Burton movie, the pie scene, because it has this like kind of sheen to it
Little
that
manic
feels like,
energy.
yeah, manic energy. And obviously, because it's a story, it feels a little bit out of time and space. And so, watching this and seeing the pie scene and then the leech scene where he pulls the leech out of his underwear, like I remembered all those chunks that were funny to a kid.
Mhm.
But watching it now, I did not realize how absolutely bone-shatteringly, heartbreakingly sad this movie is, and how much it is about grappling with grief and your place in the world and friendships. And I didn't remember how smart this movie was and how incredible it is in terms of getting to like the kind of core of what it means to be a kid, and like the division between childhood innocence and getting to the point where you're starting to kind of, that innocence is slowly starting to fade away as you kind of realize like your place in the world, especially with River Phoenix's character and him just being like, I'm stuck here forever. Like everyone's going to think I'm a loser. I'm going to just be, a guy who gets in trouble all the time. And that's my fate. And hearing like a kid say that, like right before going to junior high, it's so heartbreaking to realize like I felt like that as a kid too, but I never like kind of thought about it until rewatching this movie last night and just crying into a pillow about it. And the other part is when Gordy, because we have Gordy grappling with the trauma of his brother passing away and his parents and having like, my dad doesn't even like me. Like that was a whole other like length of trauma that I did
Yeah.
not ever want to confront or think about again. But with him, he's just like a kid realizing his status with his family at such a young age. And it's a lot to think about and take in, and realize my mom was showing this movie to me when I was like 8. Like willingly showing this movie to me. And I loved it. It's wild.
You start contextualizing it like in terms of like the Vietnam War as well,
Mhm.
right? Where you've got like it's like a lot of these people who worked on this movie were people who were like, well, the 50s were fine because they didn't send us to Southeast Asia to, go and kill a bunch of people. You know what I mean? Like it was,
Right.
it was like contextually, I think that there was sort of this sense of like, I think, and it'd be interesting to talk to Rob Reiner about it, or even King about it. Was there something sort of bucolic here that, again, to us, to younger people, is terrifying because, we've lived through wars, but we haven't been sent to war. You know what I mean? We haven't had the sort of the Vietnam experience, right? I think, these were kids who were sandwiched between two like kind of major wars that again, we haven't sort of had to deal with that as Gen X and millennials and Zoomers, and so I wonder if there is this sort of like, weird to say, but like a lack of self-awareness where it's like you're watching the sort of sausage get made and it's not gross to them.
Right. What's interesting, though,
it's not callous. It's very sensitive.
No.
I don't want to say it's not, it doesn't feel like it's callous. It feels like it's very genuine, but it's also very like matter of fact, which I guess is also like, that's very Stephen King, is sort of like, this place is haunted and it just is, don't worry about it. Like, that's just welcome to Maine. You know what I mean? It's like, there's like this sort of aw shucks kind of mentality that is super effective for spookiness. So maybe it's done by design. Maybe I just kind of blew up my own theory. I don't know.
Well, I do think rewatching this movie now, one of the things that really impressed me was the almost anti-nostalgia for the 50s that this movie kind of has, like hiding underneath the seams. Because a lot of times when we watch a lot of 80s movies, a lot of those movies were kind of influenced by the kind of 50s style film, or like, suburbia, that kind of aspect of it that felt very 50s and its like sentimentality. And there is some of that here, but like, once you start to like look at these people, they're all very damaged. Teddy his ear is burnt because his father held his face to a stove and is now in an insane asylum somewhere. So we have that. You have Gordy, who's grappling with the fact that his brother, who was sort of like the 50s ideal. He's a handsome man, he drove cars, he had a girlfriend, he played football, and he's the one that passed away. And Gordy, this little weird kid who likes writing stories and telling stories about throwing up, is like the one that lived. And you have poor it's Chris, I think, right, that River Phoenix plays, Chris, who's his whole family is looked down upon in town. So we have all of these different people that are just grappling with something that I don't think a lot of 50s nostalgia kind of exemplifies. It's usually just sort of ma and pa and everyone is happy and everything is so whitewashed. And here it's like, no, it's still kind of fucked up. Yeah. And that really struck me on this watch that I had never really thought of, I guess.
Well, yeah. I think it's such a king thing, you know, like that's something that I think we've all come to kind of realize maybe after the fact, you know, is such a huge part of King, is like, oh, wait, well, right underneath this thing is a really fucked up situation.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and this movie almost feels timeless is not the right word, but it doesn't focus on the fact that it's the 50s. There's obviously like the visual cues with the cars. We have Corey Feldman's glasses. Like there's visual cues, but it does feel a little bit removed from, again, that kind of sentimentality of that time period specifically. I think it feels almost timeless in a way, even though, again, it is anchored in being in the past and being in the 50s, but there's something about it that kind of tries to, like you said, Terry, avoid that kind of like saccharine nostalgia that, again, we've seen a lot of that now in like these 80s. I mean, come on, Stranger Things is trying to be Stand By Me with like scarier stuff, and we see this like nostalgia coming back now. So it's also really interesting watching Stand By Me now after we've had a lot of these movies and shows that are coming out in the past couple of years that I think are trying to follow that formula that Stand By Me, and correct me if I'm wrong, feels like it really like created these group of four boys who obviously give each other shit, but it's like a non-toxic emotional friendship, especially between Gordy and Chris's character, who they're able to cry in front of each other and be emotionally vulnerable. And like, we barely see that now, like in cinema. So having this such early example of a non-toxic group of guy friends who are just, they love each other and they're friends. And even though it's fleeting, like it's something so pure about that friendship that I wish we saw more of. Still continue to see more of, but yeah.
Yeah, the scenes where Chris breaks down and cries in front of Gordy is just, well, first of all, it reminded me how tragic it is that we lost River Phoenix, because he is so phenomenal in this performance. Like all the characters, all the actors in this are really good, but his performance in particular, just like, I don't know, it just really stood out to me this time. And I don't know, there's something very otherworldly or like ahead of his time. Like he has like an emotional intelligence in this role that I just surprised the hell out of me for being a child actor. Really, it's just so good. I'm curious though, with some of the scenes, what was it exactly about this that's terrified you, Noah? Was it the overall kind of feel of this movie, or did the scenes jump out at you that kind of scared you as a kid?
You know, I'm sure that there were, I'm sure that the leeches and running from the train. I mean, there's a lot of like sort of exciting gags in the movie, you know, running from the dog. I mean, there's all this stuff that is kind of super dynamic that is happening in the movie. It does feel like you're kind of on an adventure, but I'm absolutely sure that it was the emotional stuff. It was, you know, I don't know, it was, you know, Chris stealing the milk money and admitting to it, you know, and still being sort of treated like a piece of shit for doing it, right? This idea that like grown-ups aren't going to protect you.
Yeah.
Eyeball doesn't protect them, right? Like that is a big realization that I think happens to people too young. This idea that they are not going to be protected and cared for. And I think that that's something that in one way or another, all the kids are grappling with, right? Like, you know, whether Gordy's dealing with it because his brother passed away, or, you know, whether Chris is dealing with it because he comes from this like totally broken home, or, Teddy, Corey Feldman's character, because he is the victim of domestic abuse, parental domestic abuse, and even even Vern, I mean, as the sort of, kind of, this sort of chubby, quirky, intellectual kid is sort of kind of like, I'm not part of anything. You know what I mean? It's like, I'm not being protected. I'm not being, and he can kind of laugh it off because he does what a lot of people do, which is becomes the funny one, right?
Yep.
And that's sort of you see it happening. You're watching it as it happens, like, and when you're, and I think, the kind of, the effectiveness of it is that I think as a little kid, you probably knew that's what was going on, even if you couldn't articulate it watching the movie. Right? We knew what that scene was because we were that kid, or we knew that kid. I think a lot of people listening to this probably were that kid. So, we weren't, most of the people listening to this podcast, a lot of people who are still talking about this movie weren't the Chris's. They were the Gordys or the Verns, right?
Yep.
They were the people who somehow tried to turn it into something that helped them kind of get a foothold. And I think, again, sort of watching that happen in real time as it's happening to you in real time is fucking terrifying.
Yeah, it really is. This movie has a lot of, there's a melancholy to it, but there's also a whole lot of existential dread. And it made me start thinking about the first time that I guess as a kid, experienced death in a way. And there was there's two things that jumped out at me in terms of like thinking about that. And the first one was, I remember being, I don't know, I must have been like 8 or 9 years old and finding a dead bird on the side of the road and feeling like I have to bury this. And so I buried it in the ground right outside the road, and I put like a little stick in it, sort of like thinking about it. And then a few days later, I don't know why I did this, I went back and I dug it up, and it just was full of maggots. And so like this was my first realization of like, this is death. And then when I was 14, I lost a friend in a car accident. She was visiting her parents were divorced, she was visiting her father, and they had a car accident. She was not wearing a seatbelt. And so I remember not wanting to go to her funeral because in the back of my mind was this image of what death was, which was this bird. And it seems so weird to like conflate the two, but that was what was going through my childhood mind at then. And I was like, so I'm watching this and I'm thinking about the fact that they're going to actively see this body. And it's like, this is their first encounter with mortality in a way. And it just, I don't know, it like got me spiraling as I was watching this movie last night.
But it's also interesting because it's not Gordy's first experience with death, but it's what helps him confront, like actually kind of, I think, more understand his brother's death, which I think is another interesting part of this movie where it's like, yeah, it seems to be all of their first experiences of death except for Gordy, but Gordy hasn't like really come to terms with his brother's death yet. And then seeing this body, and we have Gordy's kind of breakdown when he sees it, it's like, why did my brother have to die? And it's just like this experience is all of them kind of realizing, they have all these like near-death experiences here where like that they're running from the train and they're just being kids, but then they kind of realize, oh shit, like this kid is our age and he got hit by a train. It's not like some horrible murder. Like it was an accident and something terrible happened to him, and it could happen to anyone at any age. It's not like kids aren't safe. And so there's this illusion of safety that's just kind of completely, I feel like, wiped away. And I think that even happens when, Kiefer Sutherland's like gang of guys shows up and Gordy grabs the gun and is like, all right, like I'm done. Like it's I know it's very kind of on the nose, like he's got the gun, is not pointing at them and he didn't want to have the gun before, but still I think it is like an interesting part of like these kids finally realizing like safety is an illusion.
Yeah.
And while they've gone through trauma and Teddy has gotten, his father has hurt him, everything has hurt him, there is still again this like kind of shocking realization that kids aren't safe. And no matter what you do in the world, no matter how much you try to protect yourself, there is still danger out there. And I think that is like such a terrifying nugget in this movie of just like the realization that you are not safe, no matter how old you are and how careful you are. safety is kind of very easily destroyed.
Yeah,
which is a lot.
And that hero moment that happens at the end when Eyeball and the gang shows up, to I don't know, to claim the body or something as if it is, their trophy.
Yeah.
And there's Gordy's reaction is a moment of growth, right? Like Gordy's reaction is the moment where he sort of says, no, like we have to kind of be stewards for a very human, very sensitive experience, as opposed to exploiting it, or as opposed to kind of treating it callously, which makes them infinitely more mature than their big siblings, right? And it kind of says like, okay, now we're on a different playing field. It's no longer that you're big brother and I'm little brother. Now I'm actually a good person and you're a shitty person. And that is something that we take with us for the rest of our lives. That's sort of like, that's the moment that you grow up. Right. And it's encapsulated in this very, obvious way. Absolutely. But it's incredibly effective.
Yeah. I was also thinking about how I love when movies you saw in a lot, particularly like the kind of teen comedies of like the 80s, where they got after school and then there's like the little credit title cards where like this person went off to do this person went off to do this. And this film kind of does that in a more subtle way, but it kind of dispenses with their futures as if like they're meaningless. And that just like, I don't know, watching this as a 41-year-old, just like it really hit me in the stomach about like, this was the moment. This was their one moment. And then afterwards it was like, we lost touch with Vern and Teddy. They were just faces in the hallway. Last I heard, Vern was
counterpoint, Terry. Counterpoint. I actually think that the sort of epilogue of what happened to the boys is very telling.
Okay.
Because I think that, and tell me if I'm wrong, I don't have it in front of me, but Vern basically becomes like a normo.
Yes.
Right. Like Vern is like, he's got kids. He like works in a factory or something, and
certified forklift operator.
He's a certified forklift. I mean, so you have to, but you got to figure again, this is not a movie that is about how, is not about sort of otherworldly sets of expectations and successes. Like that's a good success for Vern. Like Vern, who kind of had to joke his way through being ostracized, ostensibly has a good job and a family, and everything's going really well, And then you've got Teddy, who has, went to jail and kind of never left town, and obviously never dealt with the incredible trauma of having been abused, and Gordy went on to become a writer and to sort of be the narrator, right? Like, that kind of makes sense for him. And then the Chris of it all, right? Chris, in spite of it all, became a real person and became a good person, and then died being a good person, right? He died breaking up the fight, and he got sort of stabbed in the middle of somebody else's fight or something. And I don't know. I think it does sort of reflect that, like that their futures do kind of line up with the story that we saw over a weekend when they were 12.
Yeah. No, that's true.
It is also scary in its own way of just like, I guess not scary, but there's something, it's both like comforting, but also like, oh shit, like they set themselves they set themselves on these paths so young. And there is something like existentially terrifying about that. Mostly thinking about my own self as a child and like that. Yeah. Wow. Good Lord.
Yeah.
Because I wanted to be a writer since I was a kid, and now I am writer, and I'm like, oh shit, like I am a little bit like Gordy, and that kind of like, and it's not a bad thing, but it's just very weird to kind of think about it and conceptualize it that way. It's just very like, oh, I was a kid once. Weird.
Yeah, I honestly, I think this might be my favorite adaptation of a King work, honestly. And there was some kind of like little bit of a nugget where Reiner recalled that after a private early screening of the film, King excused himself for 15 minutes to compose himself, and then returned to remark that, quote, "This is the best film ever made out of anything I've written," which isn't saying much, but you really captured my story. It is autobiographical. And then Reiner, in a Ask Me Anything on Reddit a few years ago, said that Stand By Me is his personal favorite of his own films. And there's I don't know, there's so much humanity to this film that it's such a good film.
It's so good. So thanks for letting us watch it again, Noah.
Yeah.
Or
Hey,
making us
thank
watch
you
it again.
guys for accepting this as a scarred for life entry. I mean,
it made perfect sense.
I feel like there are not many people who do not have a very kind of genuine visceral reaction to Stand By Me. I think it really evokes something. And maybe it won't for people who were not of our generation. Maybe it is sort of a generational thing. But the movie is a generational movie. I mean, there's stuff that is out there that like my kids are going to be into that like I'll probably not connect with on an emotional level, you know, and I hope I do. But I do think that, that there's this sort of you know, the movie is about a sort of liminal place in our lives. And I think the movie itself occupies sort of a liminal place in our lives, and probably the lives of people who listen to podcasts. So, you know, join us.
Come on. But so let's wrap up and give this our rating out of 5. Terry, you're going to go first. How many leeches out of 5 do you give Stand By Me?
Boy, I mean, when I added this on Letterboxd, I saw that I'd given it a 4. I think I'm probably going to bump that up a little bit and give it I'm going to cut one of those leeches in half, throw it off of the balls, and say this is a 4.5 film for me. I don't know. I think I've seen so many King adaptations, and I honestly think that this one understands the heart and understands the feeling in the short story, the novella that he wrote, more so than a lot of adaptations get. Because I do think a lot of times when people adapt King's work, they might get the narrative right, they might get the kind of structure right, but there's something that I feel like they're missing in terms of, a lot of times, not all of them, a lot of times in terms of like the emotion and the meaning behind what King was writing. And I think this one captures that absolutely perfectly in a way that surprises me even today, rewatching this some 30 years later, I think. 30 or more years later. So this is a 4.5 for me. What about you, Mary Beth?
It's definitely a 4.5. I had fond memories of watching this with my family when I was younger, but now rewatching it, I just have an even deeper appreciation for it and what it says about childhood and also what it says about storytelling. I mean, we have all these fun interludes of Gordy's stories about a fat kid getting revenge and throwing up pie. And like, I think
great image.
It's just, I know, God, it's stuck in my head forever. And now I remember where it's from. And I think it's just a really, like all of King's stuff, a really good look at the art of storytelling. And like you said, Terry, I think it is one of the best adaptations of his work. I think from the performances to just the direction to everything about it, it just cuts that weird liminal part of your childhood when like you're about to go to junior high and you're kind of starting to realize what the world is, but you're not totally sure yet. And it captures that excitement and fear in such an incredible way that I haven't really seen done quite often in cinema. So I'm just glad I could rewatch it and reappreciate for what an incredible film that it is. But then Noah, you have the final word. How many leeches out of 5 do you give Stand By Me?
How
Listeners,
many?
you gotta tell listeners what did you just do?
I just looked down my own. I looked down my own shirt,
Looking for leeches.
Looking for leeches. Yeah, I mean, I think it's a perfect film. I think it's 5 leeches out of 5. You know, I picked it. It would be awkward if I didn't think that it was effective, especially as a movie that is so effectively now as an adult reflective of my experience as a kid when I watched it, right? And think about like the magic there, that as a kid I watched this movie and it connected with me and it resonated with me because it made me it sort of confirmed my feelings and it made me feel seen. And now as an adult it gives me comfort and not in any less effective a way. And
Yeah.
I think that's so incredibly magical, especially when you're able to sort of take the scariness and the trauma along with the fellowship and the camaraderie and the coming of age, and then still look back at it and go, this is incredible. This is beautiful. I mean, how many anythings can you say that about?
That's a good point. I have reapproached a bunch of media that I consumed as a kid in the 80s, and a lot of it hasn't aged as well. But this movie, I was dreading kind of watching it because I had such a specific memory of it as a kid. But revisiting it, you're absolutely right. You nailed it on the head. I think I'm going to add that half leech back in and just give it full on 5 for me too, because you're couldn't say it better. You're absolutely right.
Hearts and minds, one at a time, Terry. That's what I like to do.
Well, thank you so much, Noah, for joining us to talk about Stand By Me. Where can us just find you, and what do you have that you're able to talk about or share or promote?
Oh, I am on, whatever social media sites exist this week. Who knows? Who knows where I'll be next week? But I'm pretty easy to find out there on the internet. Noah Segan. Sometimes under Kid Blue on like Twitter and Instagram and stuff. And then other than that, I mean, I got this movie that just came out, Blood Relatives, and hopefully enough people like it and pick it at Sam Zimmerman's house to convince him that we need to make another one.
Hell yeah. So, listeners, you've heard from us, but we want to hear from you. What was your experience with Stand By Me? You can send us an email at scarredforlifepodcast@gmail.com, or you can reach out to us directly on Twitter. I am at MB McAndrews.
And I'm a Gaily Dreadful.
And of course, don't forget to follow the podcast on Twitter at Scarred Podcast.
And please don't forget to review, rate, subscribe. And if you want to support us some more, we are on Patreon.
Thank you to Eric Power for our artwork. Thank you to Sean Keller for our music. Thank you, everyone, for listening. Please stay safe out there, but most importantly, stay creepy.
And until next time.